And we are live. Greetings, salutations, and all that jazz, folks who just missed Peter Chiykowski metal dancing to our stinger. I wish I had managed to record that. I don't know what to say. You missed a treat there, guys.
I nearly headbanged my headphones right off. That gets me pumped every time. It gets me so pumped every time.
It is, yes, it is the adrenaline. It is the thing. Oh man, guys, it's so nice to be live on this beautiful Friday for most of us. And Peter, it's so nice to have you joining us today. How are you doing?
I am doing great. Thanks so much for having me back. I enjoy this so much every time. Every time I walk away with like a million ideas for world building and like about world building, and it's always a treat. It's always such a treat.
Well, I think the same thing, which is why I keep asking you back, Peter. But some of you may know, some of you may not know that Peter has just done a very successful launch of his new deck of no, I'm gonna get the name right. New Lore Masters deck, right? So tell us a little bit. Just give us like the 2-sentence brief. What is the series that you've created, and how does the Lore Masters deck fit in?
Yeah, so I make creative prompting decks for people who like to write, and especially for people who like to write like fiction and write fiction set in worlds that don't exist. So originally that was the story engine deck, which is the one that's being pointed to in the deck of worlds. One was for like creating storytelling prompts, one was for creating world building prompts. And then the lore masters deck was my attempt to like capture that process of like when your galaxy brain is exploding and you're like, okay, I got this faction. And then, you know, they like have this same secret ancient weapon and the weapon's located in this location, in this crypt. And then there's like a magical creature that guards it. I'm trying to like map that brain exploding process of like all these different little, nodes in your big web of lore and like trying to be able to map them and understand how they all fit together. And this is my attempt to like put that experience in a box and help give it a bit of structure and also a bit of like a record. We can actually follow your map of how all the things developed off each other and organically creating like lore webs in a fun, creative, prompted way, make it a bit of a game.
They are so cool. I'm so in love with them. Every time I open them up, I am both inundated with ideas and filled with joy. And folks, I've got some good news for you people who are here on the live stream. We are actually raffling off a copy of the Deck of Worlds. That's, for those of you who are watching video, that's this one over here, which I keep pride of place on my bookshelf because I just love it so much. I think it's just so spectacularly done. Not just the world building, it's so intelligently done, but also the fact that it is just beautiful. Like the layout is great, the art is great. This is just something that I really personally love. I am not paid to say this, to be clear. I just love the thing, and it gives me extra special joy that Peter is an Anvilite, so I have an excuse to get like extra excited about it. But yeah, I just think it's amazing. So if I can get this, forgive my French, sodding raffle to work, I will. I will. Don't tell me I have one running. I don't have one running. Sorry, beans. The raffle is not for the new one because the new one is, I believe, probably not yet printed. Is that correct, Peter?
Yeah, I only have alpha copies right now. There's 4 copies of existence. 2 are on my desk, and then 2 are with the Story Engine CEO. Yeah, so that we can take pictures and stuff and do little demos. But that's all that exists right now.
Peter says, sorry, Drunken Panda says, I think attempting to map out that exploding galaxy brain feeling is the best description of world building I have ever heard. Yes, absolutely. So if you are over on Twitch, !raffle. Sorry, people on YouTube and people from the future listening to this. I only have the technology to run raffles over here on Twitch. But yeah, you can find us twitch.tv/worldanvil. If you'd like to take part, just go in, !raffle. And we'll be pulling that at the end of the stream. So if you have entered, stick around and make sure you are there to claim your prize, or it may go to somebody else. Well, we've talked a lot about the Deck of Worlds, and we've talked a lot about the Story Engine deck, and we've talked a lot about the Lore Masters deck already. We're going to be talking more about that in a minute because, guys, today we are talking about interconnected world lore. We are discussing kitchen sink world building, and basically today we're going to be talking about what is it? Is it useful? What is it? Something we should be avoiding? Yeah, I'm very glad to be talking about this with Peter because, as I said, he is just absolutely spectacular. He has made this amazing things. He is the creator, the award-winning creator, I should say, of Rock Paper Cynic, the webcomic. He's got 6 books of comics and short stories. He's twice won the Aurora Award for the Best Graphic Novel from the Canadian Science Fiction and Fantasy Association. His fiction, game writing, and poetry have appeared in the award-winning tabletop RPG Everwind, the video game Fracta, and publications like the Best Canadian Poetry, Best Canadian Speculative Writing, Asimov Science Fiction, and more. My goodness, who could be better to come talk to us about kitchen sink world building than somebody who's so experienced? So I guess we should kick off with a question. What is fantasy kitchen sink world building? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, I tend to think of it as almost more, it's like a mode of creation, and it can also just be like a phase in the creative process, where you're throwing in everything in the kitchen sink. And I think that's where like you're not saying no to any ideas. So any idea you have for your world, I'm gonna plop that in. Maybe I don't know where it fits yet. Maybe I don't know how this like fits into the lore, but like I like it and I just want to see if I can include it. And it's that moment of like it's almost less like world building and it's more like stocking the cupboard of your world with a ton of ingredients that you can use later. And it's just like piling that stuff in, just including anything that you want anytime and seeing what happens. How do you tend to think about it? Because I know there's different like ways of even thinking about this as an approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a very common saying, which is you get one thing, you get one bite. This is something that screenwriters use a lot. And I think fantasy kitchen sink world building is the opposite of that. You don't get one thing, you have everything. So instead of saying, okay, this is a world of vampires and werewolves, that's it, basta, enough. You have vampires and werewolves and demons and fairies and arcane magic and robots and aliens and eldritch abominations and I don't know, time travel, ancient Greek gods walking around. You have it all. You say yes to everything. So instead of just having, a couple of big pillars, a couple of big concepts, you have a lot of big concepts. You have everything and the kitchen sink, hence the name, of course, fantasy kitchen sink.
Yeah, I think it's a very good way of putting it. Very good way of putting it.
Yeah. So I think when we're talking about definitions, examples are so useful to kind of help us flesh out this concept of what we're discussing. So what are some of your favorite examples of fantasy kitchen sink world building?
I think some really good examples that I like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy always has very kitchen sink vibes to me
Yes.
because it really is like I think in each book he was looking at like what ideas are the funniest, the most interesting, the most intriguing, and then I'll find a way to plug it in. Like and I think sometimes it's more strained than in other cases, but he never said no to like if this is a fun, interesting, comedic idea and like I can sort of stick it somewhere in the universe, then I'll do that. And I think it really works for like also I think Doctor Who is a great example where like there is a lore, there is like a canon and everything, but essentially a ton of different writers are going to be taking on this project at different times. They're going to have different interests and focuses. And I think it happens a lot with multi-writer projects and shared universes because people, they put these little additions and extensions on. But I think that it really shines in those two examples because both of them kind of embrace the breadth and randomness and diversity of the universe as like a theme in their storytelling.
Yes.
So the fact that there isn't like an overarching mood or tone or theme, and you can have like a Doctor episode that's super dark and gritty, and you can have a Doctor episode that's like just bananas off the walls, ridiculous fun, and they both feel like the same show. It's because that show is about kind of embracing like the huge range of not just the human experience, but like the experience of being a sentient thing in a universe that can be very random and strange, and like what it means to experience life that way. So yeah, those are like my two favorite examples of like I think they do it right. I think they have a lot of fun with it, and I think they fold some of the like what could be a drawback for kitchen sink world building. They fold that into the theme in such a way that it feels like incorporated. And in terms of fantasy, I might get in trouble for saying this because like I don't know the larger Witcher world building. I don't know the games and the books, but the show sometimes gives me a bit of a kitchen sink vibe, and I think it's probably more the experience of me as a viewer and not actually the world building because I don't know the connective tissue. So sometimes I'll just see something in the background or like a new character from a certain space will be introduced in a way where like if you're a fan, you'll figure it out because you know the context. And if you're not, it's like, oh, that's kind of like random and different. And so you'll wander through this world, you'll get little small glimpses of like individual places and bits and pieces. And to me, it feels as someone who like only knows little bits of the universe, I have the kitchen sink experience there. Because like a new scene, new location, doesn't feel super connected to the last one, but let's dive in. I think that was a great example of leaning into like the episodic nature of storytelling in such a way that it's okay if it feels a little disconnected because the next episode is supposed to be something different, and they do bring it kind of all together at the end. I think literally in like the last episode of season 1, they have that great thing where like all the little icons that they've been showing in the openings of each of those episodes suddenly come together, and you see like, oh, there's a pattern and a shape to it. But yeah, I think kitchen sink world building can be a method and then also an experience from the viewer side of just the way in which the information or the lore of the world is unfolded. If you don't make that pattern apparent at first, you can give the kitchen sink experience, and if you do that like really carefully, you can kind of like reveal the pattern later. And like the whole time, the kitchen sink was actually a whole kitchen, like not just a sink. And I think that's kind of a cool trick, basically, a cool writer's trick.
Yeah.
What are some of your favorites?
Well, I think Doctor Who is a great example, and I think we'll talk more about this later. But Doctor Who is Monster of the Week, right? Anything that's Monster of the Week. Mm-hmm. Often you get that kitchen sink feel to it. So Buffy the Vampire Slayer is another kitchen sink world. It's very common in urban fantasy. The librarians do this a little bit. If you go into things like the Sookie Stackhouse mysteries, again, you start with vampires, cool. And then suddenly there's this whole like, and then everything else, and the kitchen sink, right? Where they start bringing in more and more and more different things. Fringe, if anybody remembers Fringe as a TV show, that was something that, again, it kind of toyed with this a little bit as well. And again, that had a Monster of the Week feel. I think the other space, and superheroes, of course, things like The Flash, where like 1 week it's robots and the next week it's giant sapient gorillas, and the week after that it's, it's yourself from the future, and everything is possible, and any kind of thing could possibly exist. Superheroes, this is very, very common in that kind of world. And again, superheroes tend to be Monster of the Week. The other thing that you see, the kind of world that you see a lot this kind of world building is worlds where it's a journey. The whole idea is a journey. And I think that's where you set on
Witcher.
Douglas Adams.
Oh yeah, actually.
Particularly. That was one where I was like, yeah, of course it is. The other ones like this, Gulliver's Travels, for the same reasons. It's this kind of like, it's a series of episodic encounters that are designed to be bizarre for the reason of being bizarre. Like Gulliver's Travels is exactly that. It's like a guy goes off traveling and shenanigans. It's not phrased like that on the book cover, obviously, but those kinds of stories, they can make kitchen sink world building really, really work, because the whole idea is it's the new weird, right? That's what they're trying to express. And then this is the next weird thing, and then there's this other weird thing. And with the kitchen sink world, that actually works really well, because you're presenting new and then new and then new. It's the same with Monster of the Week. You're not trying to establish a setting that is cohesive and has that like pull together, that has that sort of intricate detail. The whole thing works because you're trying to present a new thing every single week. You're trying to present a new thing every episode. So you do end up pulling everything off the kitchen shelves. You do end up, with a grab bag of robots and ancient Greek gods, because that you need a new weird.
Yeah.
I think the other kind of worlds that do fantasy kitchen sink justifiably well are RPG worlds.
I was going to say the same thing.
Specifically, published campaign settings.
Yeah.
Sorry, do you want to speak on this a little bit?
No. I want to hear. I might springboard off of them, but I want to hear your thoughts.
Okay. In which case, it makes sense, because everybody's sense of fun is a little bit different, and you need somewhere to have fun. So Forgotten Realms is like this, but for me, the big one is Galarian. Pathfinder's Galarian. So there is a world where the robots are. There's a section where the robots are, and there's a section where it's always the French Revolution. And if you want to play an Arthurian Camelot-style knight, you can do that over here. And if you want to have adventures with demons and fight and save the world, you can do that up here. And if you want to go to, the Arabian Nights with the serial numbers filed off, then you go down here to this bit. And this bit is definitely not Fantasy Africa. It's just called the Mwangi Expanse for reasons. The whole thing is designed so that you can pick up your players and throw them into a different scenario.
Yeah.
And actually, a little bit of the reason for that is the same thing. Like, you've played 10 sessions over here, and now you want a different feel. Well, pick them up and throw them into Robot Land, or throw them into French Revolution Land, and they get the new weird. They get that new feeling, and you can have different kinds of adventures in the same world with the same characters, without it feeling stale, without it feeling like you're doing War and Peace. So that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, and I think I've quoted this like as a guest here before, but Charles Schultz of like Peanuts fame, famous world building, Peanuts the cartoon, Charlie Brown. But he talked about like the way that he wrote characters was like he was creating a keyboard. He was trying to figure out I need to be able to hit this note and this note and this note, so these characters are these keys. And I would think of it, yeah, the same way with kitchen sink world building. The nice thing is you can like always invent a new note. You can always and you can invent a new instrument. So like that orchestra experience of like, well, I want to do horror this week, that's going to feel like something Ravenlofty, and I want to do it lets you be able to hit those different notes or these different sounds and tones, and it lets you like jump genres within the same world. If you want to be able to do like
Yes.
horror one week and sci-fi another week, and
Yeah.
adventure and spy thriller, like it gives you those different spaces where those themes make sense. It lets you like invent or crisscross new themes because you can just like drop that on a new island. And I think it is really nice to have the ability to expand expand the ingredients in your cupboard for like the kind of experience you're going to serve your readers or your players or whatever. Yeah, and I think it also happens a lot on anything where there's multiple writers, because writers like kind of want to be able to do their own thing to a certain extent. Like they want to be able to create something new, and it just helps if like, oh, we just added a new island. There's a new
Yeah.
island now, and like that's what my favorite thing is world building with islands, because it lets you just like you can always add a new island. You can always extend the sea a little bit further. Islands are a great conceit because that natural border just makes it very easy to drop in new locations whenever you want to, and hand wave away why that no one's ever mentioned this place before, even though it was right there. I think
Yeah, you can do that kind of mosaic world building in a way
yeah.
that can actually work, that can actually pull together.
Yeah, yeah. I think that I have not watched or read it, but I have a friend who every time we meet up every 6 months, he just summarizes the last arc of One Piece to me, the anime One Piece and manga, and sometimes he'll even give me like, actually, so here's how this happened differently. But and it's just I think it's a very like kitchen sink world, which on top of that is very good at like trying to honor or stick to its lore. So every time it adds a new rule, it really tries to make sure that rule stays consistent and retroactively was consistent as much as possible, which is definitely a challenge. But I think as an example, I think there is primarily one creator on that throughout the arc, so you can kind of get away with that if you're like the one person who's holding it all in your galaxy brain. But yeah, it is nice to be able to just like, yeah, we're gonna make something up for this week. Totally new, doesn't have to be tied in. Maybe we'll figure out how it's connected later, or like I'm certain there are some writers out there who like just go to their own fan forums to have somebody to figure out what other people are saying to link the lore together and be like, perfect, all right, that's how I'm going to explain it.
I love that. We've kind of already moved into this space, but is fantasy kitchen sink world building bad? Is it good? What is your opinion there?
So I definitely think of it as a tool in a toolbox, and I think you can also think of it as a product of world building that is like appropriate in some scenarios. I'd say it's never inappropriate, right? Like it depends on what you want to do, but I think it's a lot more effective or it's going to create a more effective or interesting experience for readers or players if it's done in certain contexts. So yeah, my opinion is as a phase, it's totally fine, right? Like I am someone who as a writer spends a lot of time stocking the cupboard, so to speak, where like I'm creating a ton of stuff that I may not use, but I want to know like if I'm going to create a plate that is like a short story, or I'm going to create a plate that's a RPG campaign, that like in the metaphor of a meal, I want to have like a protein that's part of it. I want to have some vegetables. I want like a grain. I want some seasoning. So for me, like the kitchen sink world building is when you're filling the kitchen with like all these different ingredients that you might want to use. And generally speaking, serving someone just a pile of ingredients is not like a great experience from like a culinary and digestive perspective. So like to me, that's where like the edit comes in, and being able to like edit and decide like what is going to be in my player or my visitants experience of the world, what are they going to come across and how are they going to experience it, and how am I going to plate, and what do I need to chop up fine and small, and what can I serve in big chunks. Like I think that thinking through that process is a great thing to do after you've done the kitchen sink thing. Like go nuts in the world building process. That is its own joy, its own creative process that like doesn't need to be beautiful for anyone else but you. That can just be a thing that you spend as much of your time in as long as it's fulfilling. But if you're thinking about like publishing or sharing your world, so to speak, that's when I think like, okay, either bring in the edit or decide that the way you're going to publish it or the way people are going to experience your world is through a context where utter randomness is okay. And like RPG campaigns, there's definitely a lot more room for that. And like the other nice thing about kitchen sink world building is if enough of your elements in your world are already random and your world's not this like taut lattice of things that you can't move, because if any of them move, the whole world collapses or starts to grind against its own lore. Having a more flexible world or more inventive world means that like, hey, I'm in the middle of storytelling and I need a new faction on the spot. I can invent that without suddenly disrupting the center of balance of my world. So like having that as like an improv tool is so good as a storyteller in an RPG setting. And yeah, and I think in those like kind of zany shows like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy or book series Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, like Terry Pratchett, I think is like very good at just saying yes to an idea that works for this moment and honoring the lore later, but not being too concerned about like, does this feel like a logically consistent universe? Our universe doesn't feel logically consistent most of the time, and representing that experience through fiction is it's its own form of truth telling and being accurate. So like, yeah.
Honestly, what's interesting to me about Pratchett is I wouldn't say it's a fantasy kitchen sink world so much, because in my opinion, what he's done is he's just zoned so beautifully that he's
Yeah.
like, he's got subsettings. So he's
Yeah.
got the subsetting of the witches' characters and the stuff going on around them. And then he's got the subsetting of, you know, Commander Vimes and the stuff going on around him. And that's police procedural.
Yeah.
And then he's got, you know, other stuff going on, which is about wizards doing crazy things and getting catapulted. And that's more, you know, the new weird, the travel saga, a little bit more, and solving problems on the travel saga than it is a police procedural or a noir. So actually what he's really done is used one super setting to create beautiful little nexuses of world building, in my opinion. And sometimes he cross-pollinates his characters. He does this later within the Discworld series. I'm a massive World Amble nerd. Sorry, a massive Terry Pratchett nerd, just to be clear. So he creates like little icebergs of setting, and then he cross-pollinates the penguins between them. So actually what you end up with
metaphor. Is... I feel like penguins trading islands.
Yeah, exactly. And so what you end up with is like the little iceberg that is Ankh-Morpork that never interacts with that iceberg that is on the other side of the world, because why would it? But sometimes the characters hop genres, and then they have the genre appropriate kind of story in that location, and then they go away. So you know, there's a book where it's the opera one, where there's a witch who goes to the big city, and what does she end up in? She ends up in what is basically Phantom of the Opera, but it becomes an investigation story. It's not a story about magic, because she's in the Ankh-Morpork iceberg. So she's talking about Ankh-Morpork stuff, which is noir, it's investigation, it's police procedural. So that's what she ends up dealing with, is unpicking this Phantom of the Opera thing, which is treated more like an investigation case. So I think it's so cleverly done as a world building thing, because in a way it's not kitchen sink. It's very true to its genres within the iceberg, and then you can just move characters to different places so they can have different kinds of adventures. I think it's genius. I think it's a masterclass.
That is a really, really good point. And I think like our last conversation that we had on this was about theme, tone, and
mood. That's right.
And I think that like when I was thinking about this ahead of time, I was thinking about that like one of the potential victims of kitchen sink world building is theme, tone, and mood, because it's really hard to have the universe feel aesthetically and morally consistent if like anything can happen and you can end up anywhere next week. But I think like what shows that Terry Pratchett did it right is that each of those subsettings has a really defined theme, tone, and mood that works, is internally consistent, and that you know where you are instantly when that centering is rendering and you're reading it and you're imagining it. Yeah, I think that's like one of the tests of has kitchen sink world building gone well, is if you can go through and you can see your theme, your tone, your setting, and it feels like, okay, no, this is a consistent place. Just because there's a bunch of like random elements doesn't mean that my experience of them is that there is no like cohesive vision to this creation. So yeah, that's a super good point.
I think one of the ways that kitchen sink world building can really help you is if you're locked into a specific story structure. So it's one of the reasons that when you're watching, I mentioned to Peter earlier, I'm watching Castle right now, rewatching it. It's if you don't know it, it's a police procedural. There's a lady policeman and a man writer, and they team up to solve crimes. It's adorable. But it's the same story every time, right? Somebody dies. By the end, we need a solution. So how do you vary that? You throw it into different genres. You throw it into different themes. You throw it into different things. What you're relying on there is that the audience knows the shape of the story, so the setting of the story can be flexible. It's the same thing that superhero people have to do, because, oh, look, there's a big bad. Well, I better get rid of it by the end of the episode. That's why Monster of the Week is so often fantasy kitchen sink, because when the story structure is the same, when those big pinions are reliable for the audience, you can play with other stuff and it still feels like they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. You're changing the wallpaper instead of changing the furniture, essentially.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that like for pretty much any medium that you're creating in, knowing what your fixed points are, that like if you change those, it doesn't feel like the same thing anymore. And then knowing what are your pivot points, like where can you switch things up, and this still feels like what it should be. That's super important. I think that like either the longest running shows or the short running shows that have had that feeling of like there is no other show like this show have known like I don't know sports, but there's a metaphor that I like is like the pivot foot in basketball. It's not traveling as long as you're pivoting on the one foot, and that foot doesn't move. So like knowing what your pivot foot is and knowing what foot can travel is so helpful for giving yourself space to maneuver as a creator but stay in the same creative project without it feeling like you've just wandered into something completely different.
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked a lot about whether Fantasy Kitchen Sink is world building is bad or good, and I think there's a lot of merits there. And I think it really, like, there are a lot of franchises and spaces that have really made it work. Like, you can't say Buffy the Vampire Slayer was not successful. You can't say Doctor Who is not successful as a phenomenon. But let's talk about the common problems to watch out for if you are aiming to create Fantasy Kitchen Sink worlds. And I think we've touched on those a little bit already, but I think, I know Kitoy in the chat is saying, I love Fantasy Kitchen Sink worlds. A lot of people do love them. They can be wonderful. But what should we be watching out for?
I think that like one thing to do as you're setting out into kitchen sink fantasy world building is to decide if you're either going to. Oh, my dog has. The
doggo has appeared.
My dog has invaded. I'm going to hold on, resetting the thought while I give him a little tickle. Right. So things to watch out for. I'd say decide when you're setting out if you're going to either try to be consistent to your lore or you're going to be permissive in a way where the audience knows that like you're going to violate your own rules. Because I think both are okay, but like when you have shows that like get it right 80% of the time, then 20% of the time they're like, for this episode we decided to ignore the lore. That's when it feels like more of a violation of like, okay, but I've been paying attention and like I've been theory crafting about what could happen next, and you've changed the rules, and now all of my theory crafting feels like it was wasted. Like the contract was broken. So I think like define your contract with your reader or your players ahead of time and decide like, are we going to care about consistency, and are your players or readers going to be like rewarded for like, as you're adding in elements, are they going to be rewarded for keeping track of them, and are they going to be rewarded for being able to tell like when you introduce a new element and it behaves a certain way, does that an indication that like this new element is actually connected to this element because that character's spear is made from the same rare steel that only one person in the far north knows how to forge, and so if the steel is described as this color, that they can make the guess that like but it came from this region. So if you're going to keep adding those elements and you're going to try and be consistent, like be really clear in that, and like keep notes, like take copious notes, and then be ready to be accountable to those notes, like review them regularly. If you're in a situation where there's multiple creators, like make a wiki, use World Anvil, use the interlinking tools so that you can like see, you can link to the person who forged it from the material that you've created a page for. Like know how to keep track of those articles. Or if it's going to be one of those things where like we violate our canon all the time, then like make that clear off the top. Make it feel like yeah, don't worry too much about this. You'll give yourself a headache. We're just gonna have fun, and set that tone. I think that's one thing that really helps people understand what kind of show they're watching or book they're reading or game they're playing. Yeah, setting expectations and setting a contract with the person in your world is like a good thing to do right off the top. What are some of the problems that you feel like either you've run into or you've seen other creators run into?
Well, I think one of the problems that I don't feel like Terry Pratchett runs into, because there's such a wealth of material that he really, and as I say, he really has created icebergs. He's not, in my opinion, created a true kitchen sink fantasy. But Doctor Who is a great example. The world of Doctor Who to me feels a mile wide and an inch deep. It feels very superficial to me. Now that's absolutely fine, because that's the part of the conceit of the show. But for example, we never really dig into a lot of what could, like on the surface of it, be super fascinating things. I don't know about this or that or the other. This is something you see a lot with urban fantasy as well. The more they introduce, the less you can really make it meaningful. So, if you have aliens and werewolves and robots, they tend to all be in their own boxes. You never end up with, the robot werewolf relations and the war of 1672, where the robots hunted down the werewolves to extinction, and now there's a pact, and there's no relationship between them. There's no diplomacy, there's no trade, there's no interconnection. They are two entirely separate artificial units that the protagonists interact with, and that makes the setting feel both very shallow and very artificial, because you don't get that suspension of disbelief. You don't get that feeling that the world is going on beyond the main characters, that things are happening in the setting, that wheels are turning that we cannot see. No, it's like if the main characters aren't there, nothing exists. And I think that's something that, if it's done badly, can be a real letdown. It weakens the setting, and that's a shame,
Yeah, I think that relying on your main characters or protagonists to be like the one hub that connects all the lore, because the only thing that connects them is that these people experience them. Yeah, I think that does lead to very thin feeling worlds, and to lore that doesn't feel interconnected, to lore that feels really episodic. That can be fine in the right circumstances, especially when each episode is so interesting unto itself that you kind of don't really care what's going on with that other faction while we're doing this. But I think those worlds that we really want to stay in, and I would argue the worlds where like the stories feel high stakes, like actions have consequences, are ones where the universe is consistent, and when the players push it, it pushes back. And the readers, when the characters push it, it pushes back. And with kitchen sink world building, because anything can be anything and anything can happen next, it doesn't always feel like actions have consequences that are the results of those actions. Causality can be kind of broken up, because rather than I did A and then B happens, you have I did A and then the writers introduced C because that was the theme for next week. And that's why, like with episodic storytelling, like the world kind of resets every episode, and that sense of like, but are there really stakes? Are characters going to fundamentally be changed by the world and change the world? And for me, like I know that like to me, like the highest highs of world building, there are moments where the characters change the world and the world changes the characters. I really like those stories. I really like stories with stakes, and where like the character wanted something, they went out to get it, and now everything is different forever because of that. Like that's just such a good, powerful framework for a character experiencing the world. And yeah, the danger, and again, it's not like an inevitable result, but it's the danger of kitchen sink world building without editing or without that larger story plotting, where yeah, it's just the characters kind of in a random zany universe, and whatever happens.
Yeah, there's a rule with magic that your ability to solve plot problems with magic is directly related to how much the audience understands that magic. This is even more true when you're in an RPG, because the main characters are the players, and if they don't understand something, then they can't solve the problem with it. I think this is the same setting as well. The more people understand the intricacies of a setting, the more they can come up with creative setting-based solutions for problems. It doesn't always have to be a MacGuffin. It can be something more interesting. It can be, but we can exploit this thing and that relationship in order to do this and achieve that. It creates rich stories where everything comes together in this very satisfying way. One of the things I always say about stories is that the world building is the tapestry that weaves through both the plot and the characters. A good novel, the characters are intertwined with the setting. The plot is intertwined with the setting. It's really hard to do that when your setting is only an inch deep, because you've gone really wide and there's not a lot of understanding. And it's really hard to do when, as you said, there's that episodic feel that every time we return to the status quo, we kind of lose all the progress we made, and the world is exactly the same as we started. We've not made progress.
Yeah, like what is Homer Simpson's arc in 30 years of The Simpsons? It's so hard to do arcs when the world resets every 22 minutes or every 45 minutes. And like a really good conclusion, I would argue, should be both surprising and inevitable. It should like catch the reader off guard, but it should have everything that was needed to figure out what was going to happen should have been there from the beginning. And it should still be surprising, and that's so hard to do. Like that is like that is the pinnacle of like a really, really good ending. And for that inevitability and not just the surprise, you need to have had consistent enough world building. Or again, like you could have a kitchen sink world, but you need to know like what are if the grand finale is going to feature elements B, C, D, E, how do I make sure that like all of those elements are there from the jump? Basically, if you're going to include the kitchen sink, like what's your plumbing? What connects it to everything else?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other issue with this is an issue that's particular to Monster of the Week, but because of the connection between kitchen sink worlds and Monster of the Week worlds, this is something that you see, and it's kitchen sink worlds often feel less specific, less characteristic, but they also feel less extraordinary. Because when you're always looking for the new weird, when you're always looking for the shocking thing, it gets really mundane really quickly. So I don't know if anybody saw the Sabrina the Teenage Witch Netflix series, but that was a perfect example of this, which was also combined with power creep. So the entire first season, they spent trying to not get squashed by the devil. By the final season, they were flicking off eldritch gods one by one, like the elder ones. They were just like episode by episode dispatching them. And I was like, this is the most extraordinary power creep for like characters that are supposed to progress by 2 years or something. It was ridiculous. And it's because they were struggling every time with that, because it's kind of a monster of the week conceit. Every time they were struggling with, how can we bring in the new weird? How can we bring in something more? How can we shock them? How can we surprise them again? And that can cause real issues with your storytelling, because you're always looking for, when you're looking for more, you're looking wide. You're not looking deep. You're not going to the devil and then issues with that, and then issues with that, and then complexity, and then, integrations, and then a history that we didn't know before, or something that's returned. No, we're not dealing with one topic. We're just going out to find more challenges, essentially.
Yeah, and there's a certain genre of show and book that I really like that is hard to write. I've never been able to figure out how to do it, but I've loved watching it, and I start to get a feeling when I'm watching one. I think a good example is it's not particularly well known. It's called The Lost Room. It was like a 6-episode mini TV show from, I feel like it was like the early 2000s and 2000s. Or like actually Death Note, I think, does a good job with this too. The anime manga Death Note, of like, we're going to introduce one premise with a set of rules, and we're just going to go so deep into with this set of rules, re-explored in different ways, or like inventively repositioned in different contexts. How can we tell a story that gets deeper? When you have kind of power creep, but the power creep doesn't come because we've introduced a million new elements. It's because we've used the same set of elements in the most like brilliant recombinative ways. And I think I wish I could be a fly on the wall of the writer's room for those, because like it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous the kind of stuff that they can pull off. And I think that's kind of the opposite of kitchen sink world building, is this like, we are going to like borehole world building. We are going to drill straight down, and we're going to stay in one spot, and we're just going to see how deep this hole goes and how we can keep the same hole interesting and different every time. And you can like try and do both. Like I feel like good shows can do both. We're like, we're not going to let go of this core premise, and this this could be your meta. This could be you going really, really deep on your meta and making sure that you mine every last bit of ore that comes through this core concept that you're sticking to, while also having like these little side tunnels where you can thoughtfully explore like branches off of it, but you always know your way back to that main tunnel. So many metaphors that we've pulled in for for explaining what is itself a metaphor.
Yeah, exactly. It's very hard to talk about this kind of stuff without using imagery. I mean, it's almost like a pair of compasses where you've got the central point that is your meta, that's the central core of whatever you're doing, and then you're just drawing circles and shapes of different sizes around that, so that you're varying that audience experience. But
I should use the compass metaphor instead of the pivot foot one, because I don't know basketball, and I don't know how to explain, like, so when you have the sports ball and one of your feet is stuck for some reason related to rules, the compass makes a lot more sense. Yeah,
I think I definitely feel more comfortable with nerd metaphors than sports metaphors, so I'm going to stick with the compasses. Okay, so we've talked about what fantasy kitchen sink world building is, the common problems that might come up. Let's say you don't want to go the fantasy kitchen sink world building route. And it is tempting, as you were saying, when you're stocking your shelves, it's very tempting to have, some werewolves and some robots and some Greek gods and some, aliens and some time travel, and like it can get a bit much. How can you avoid fantasy kitchen sink building? What are the alternatives to this kind of world building? How can we approach this in another way?
I think that as you introduce each element, thinking about what its ties to what you already have is a really good way to add things consciously. And you can still like have the kitchen sink spirit, where like, if you have a good idea, write it down. Like, there's no point in not writing it down. Have your, like, for me, it's like, I think I call it my orphaned ideas document. And it's where I just like drop anything that doesn't have a parent that it's attached to. It's just like this thing that would be cool somewhere in the world. I want to have, an island where it's like kind of like an orrery, like a model of the solar system, and all these other islands are attached by chains, and they all just rotate around each other. I think that'd be cool. No idea how it connects to the lore. It's fun though, right? Like, especially those ideas that are like joyous. Like, don't ignore that joy. Capture that somewhere, because that's going to be fun. And then, if you are going to introduce it, take it out of your document and think like, where does this fit in the world? What does it connect to? And for that, you can look at like, what are the common threads that it has? So if we're like, to keep riding the example here, if we are going to introduce this like orrery island, okay, well, who has like technology to create mobile islands? Is magic involved? Do I have any mages so far? Do I have any people who, if it is actually a model of the solar system, do I have anyone who does kind of an astronomy astrology thing going on? Where are those other elements present, so that I can put this somewhere where it makes sense and doesn't like stick out as like, well, that was there for no reason. And then go from there. So yes, like look for those common threads. Make sure that things you're adding are connected, and like tools like World Anvil are really good for this because it lets you interlink, right? Like you can in the article for one thing, link to the article for the other thing. You can keep track of those connections, and it makes it very easy to navigate your own world. And if you have articles that aren't linked anywhere else, that are kind of these weird little islands on their own, that's a sign that either you haven't captured the way that they're connected, even if it's in your head, you haven't like written down and consciously given yourself time to process, this is why this matters and how it fits into the world, or your thing doesn't fit into your world, and that might be a sign that you need to cut it, or that like doesn't need to be there. You can move it back to your orphan document and then figure out, what its parentage is going to be later. And like I use the orphan document as, even when I'm like writing, not creating worlds, but like writing things, often there are lines where I'm like, that's so good and cool, but does it belong in the story? Or like, is it just a flourish that's not flourishing on top of something essential? And it's more of like a grieving process than it is an actual tool. But I have a document, I call it the organ cooler. And it's where like you cut out the organs that this thing doesn't need to live, and you just plop them there. And I pretend that like maybe I'll reuse it later. And it's mostly just there so that that feeling of like, but it's going to waste doesn't consume me, and I don't try and sneak it back in. I'll probably forget about why I cared about it in the first place if I put it there, but the only way I'll take it out of the document is if I have somewhere to put it that it doesn't feel like it's just going in the trash. So yeah,
I love
orphans and organs are
so much. Orphans and organs.
Yeah.
This could go very wrong very quickly, but we're not going to go there. No.
Yeah.
I think you're so right, and I think one of the reasons it's that trope particularly with RPG worlds, right? Like, what are my players fighting? Well, I watched these movies last week, so I guess I'll just build that. We throw a lot of shade at people who like consecutively build tons and tons and tons of worlds and never get anywhere with them. But I think that not having enough projects to satisfy, I have this idea and I can't reconcile them. Well, do you know what? Maybe it's two different things. That's okay. You can have two different IPs. It's allowed. But also, like you said, having a space where things you can just save them. I have something called writing notebook. It's just a little writing notebook that I keep. Actually, it's on World Anvil. And it's just it's just a notebook with a page that's literally just like, bleh. This is a random idea I had because I read an article or I watched a TV show or something. And whenever you're looking for ideas, guys, that's where you go. Whenever you're like, oh, I'm kind of uninspired, go back to that. Go have a look at it, because something will click and you'll see a connection. There's a great quote from Brandon Sanderson, who says one of the inspirations for his Mistborn series was that he was driving and it was really foggy night, and he was like, oh, I love this. I want to do something with this. I have no idea what. And so he put it into his notebook, and then when he was coming up from Mistborn, it was one of the sort of key features of the mood was that fog, that mist, which, when he reread it, he was like, yes, I remember this feeling. That's what I want from my book. And he had it, he recorded it, so he could go back and find it when it was going to be appropriate for the thing he wanted, rather than just like jammed in because it's cool and I've only got one world. So I guess that's where I'm putting it. Right.
And like, honestly, paying attention to things that make you feel things is probably one of the best skills that a writer or creator can have. Because if you're feeling something, like, again, I think I talked about this in a very weird, I almost sounded like an alien the last time you had me on, because I talked about like how like all of us have the same set of hardware that our emotions and our thoughts run on. Like we all have brains they're all different from each other, but a lot of the core stuff runs the same way. And if a thing makes you feel something, it will probably make a lot of people feel something similar. And if that feeling is interesting or memorable, and like we remember feelings so much better than we remember details. Yeah. We remember how things made us feel a lot more than we remember like what they actually did or said. So pay attention to things that make you feel things, and like write those things down. because so much of that feeling of like being lost in the mist and that sense of like both fear and wonder, that like that is an anchor that you could 100% base an entire successful franchise off of. Like why would you ignore something that made you feel something that powerful? And like being able to go back to that feeling and remember the images or elements or words or experiences that provoked it, are like, pay attention to that, write it down, always write it down. And again, you don't have to include it all. This ingredient may not be for this meal, it might be for a future meal, but like stock your cupboards. And then later, yeah, I 100% will go back to my random ideas document, and like often like I'll base a short campaign arc off of like an idea where like, oh yeah, that made me feel something, or that gave me a chill when I thought about it or wrote it down. And again, like even if it doesn't fit into the world right now, I'll often look at how would I fit this into the world. And like I remember my random notes document had an idea for like a monster of the week that was an arm that just crawls out of a hole and can drag the hole around. It was like this terrifying idea that I had. I'm like, that sounds like good horror. And then I had to come up with like I were hosting a friend who'd never played D&D, and we wanted to like run a D&D session for her. And I know that she likes horror, and I also like we also like sort of love the Mediterranean as a space. And I read that thing and I imagined like an ancient Sicilian horror witch kind of vibe, where the claw coming out of the hand coming out of the hole is like a witch's arm coming out of a well. And that became an entire island of the world that I'm doing my home campaign in, where like this is gonna be the island where there's a bit more like horror, old folklore vibes. We're gonna get to do some like old folklore of like Sicily, and just capture something that the other locations didn't have. And again, it was because I had my big document. I took an idea that was very much a kitchen sink idea, and then I thought, like, what's the plumbing? How does this connect to the rest of everything else in a way that feels tangible? And that ended up being like a really fun arc.
I love that.
Yeah,
I
it's
think that's
a
wonderful.
good process.
And I think, again, like you were just mentioning the meta. We've been talking about the meta since 2017. You know, like we're obsessed with this idea of a world building meta. You know, a core document for your setting that helps you have those touch points. That helps you have, oh yeah, these are my big pillars I can connect stuff to, and then it will feel things. Even if not everything is connected to everything else, if something's connected to a big pillar in your world, that's already going to make it feel like it's in the right place, like it's more appropriate, like it's, you know, something that is genre appropriate and mood appropriate and tone appropriate. So I think sticking to those design choices and not jumping the shark, not breaking the mold and going, oh, it's aliens every time you have a problem you can't solve. You know, going back to that meta, using it to dig deeper into the questions of your world to get drama and conflict and depth. Like drag it from the DNA of the setting, drag it from what you've already talked about, like that idea of boring down the hole. I think that's something that will really, really help you build stuff that's like got all the connections and the meaning already built into it, because it's come from a place of meaning. It's not come from a place of, you know, random inspiration because I watched that movie, where it's very much tangential.
As I, or I think anyone with ADHD and a fridge can tell you, like it's very easy to get distracted wanting to buy new ingredients and like just friggin' forgetting the vegetables that are dying in your vegetable drawer, that like 100% you could use if you just remembered that they were inspiring to you last week, and you just have forgotten the inspiration temporarily. Do like before you add the new elements, like again, jot it down, but like then do an inventory of your ingredients and be like, hey, I already have a vegetable. Maybe I don't need to throw a new vegetable into this dish. Maybe we can use the one that was so interesting a moment ago, and remember why it's interesting, and plate that in an interesting way rather than now aliens.
Right, like Indiana Jones 4, which does not exist. Damn it, I hate that movie. So I think one of the other things that you can use, and we must go on to the next question because we must go on to the next question, but I think this is really important, is if you've expanded without thought beyond the original scope of your world. So if you have a world that is smaller, like for example, you're doing just a region or just an island, and then you start to expand, again, expand intentionally, expand with a thought to how the themes that are important, the pillars that are important, can be transformed and made new, rather than just pulling in other ingredients. You know, Game of Thrones actually does this very well. One of the core tenets of Game of Thrones is class relations. You know, it's the nobles versus the kings, people that living in King's Bottom, right? So when you look at Daenerys' struggle way over there what's she doing? She's talking about slaves versus free people. Well, that's exactly the same thing. What are they doing up in the north? Well, they're talking about the same thing. Class relations between somebody who is born as a noble or somebody who is born as a bastard. It's the same theme. He's using the same theme everywhere. He's just doing it in different ways, in different areas. And by doing that, what he's doing is he's using the same theme in different ways. He's transforming it and making it fresh, but it's still something that feels consistent and coherent. And it also means, by the way, when those characters meet each other, they have something to talk about, because otherwise it would be like, I fight dragons, great. I knit things. They're from different worlds. If they've got nothing in common, that's very hard to do. But if they have a theme in common, well, then now they can have a conversation.
Yeah, 100%. I think knowing how each of your elements either connects to your meta or your theme or to enough other elements
Yes.
that it's tied in. Like, I think maybe if two of those three things are true, either it connects to your meta, it connects to your theme, or it connects to at least three other things in a meaningful way, then probably what you have is worth including, and it's structurally important. And if it doesn't connect to if it doesn't have at least two of those, then probably it's on the borderline of cuttable. And I make some allowance for sometimes something is just so cool that to leave it out feels like a disservice. I get that feeling. I have definitely kill your darlings is the expression. I've definitely let a bunch of darlings live that probably could have been, again,
they've survived through rule of cool, essentially.
Yeah. But the more you can put, and often if something's cool enough, you will find ways to connect it. Do the work of writing those connections. And even if that means retroactively, and it won't be retroactive from your players, your readers' experience if you do this ahead of time, but okay, actually I'm going to add in the point of connection to that thing I already created so that it's there. Thinking flexibly about your world and being willing to change things that you thought were canon, and treating it as fluid, especially until it's locked into place by being published or it's locked into place by players coming into your world, is a good thing to do. Don't be so precious about the things you already have in place that you can't adjust them to make room for new things that work.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'd be amazed what you can swing. I don't talk about my own world building very much, but I have a setting right now that is an urban fantasy setting, 18th century urban fantasy. And it's got vampires and werewolves and this, that, and the other. But do you know what? They're all the same thing. They're all a thing called dimorphs. They're made through rituals. They're all humans who have become other through a specific passage. So they're all the same thing. And what that means is I don't really have vampires and werewolves and this and that and the other. No, what I have is people. I've got a bunch of people who've done things to themselves. And that means that I don't end up with those weird isolated things. No, what I end up with is something that is connected by a united concept. And I can just treat them as characters because they don't clump in the same way. They don't form those kind of superficial units, that their own little worlds within worlds that don't connect to each other. So, I mean, that's just one example of the way you could do it. You could do it in 1,000 different ways. But if you want to have lots of a thing, you can make it work. If you want to have something that's rule of cool, you can make it work. You can bring it in. You're all super creative beings. I know that you can think outside the box and bring it into something that's going to make sense. You just, like Peter said, you just got to do the work. So speaking of doing the work, what if you have realized during the course of this podcast, this session, that you have a fantasy kitchen sink world and you don't want one? How do you fix a fantasy kitchen sink world?
The first thing I always do is kind of an inventory. I inventory the kitchen. I pull everything out of the cupboards, lay it out, and okay, so and you know how a kitchen layout, you start off with rules about what goes in what drawer, and then all of a sudden there's 3 drawers that have not really related things anymore. At some point there was a rule this has things that are plastic and also utensils that I need a lot. This one has utensils that I use less often, but also it has the long things that don't fit in the other drawer, and you have these weird categories. So pull it all out and figure out what are your categories. And I think actually a great example of the dimorphs thing you were talking about there, introducing another metaphor, you can have a lot of colors if they all pass through the same prism, right? Light refracts through a prism. One prism that is the right shape, and you've defined the shape, can give you a lot of different colors to work with on your palette, and that's really a wonderful thing to do. But if you can figure out how they all come back to the same prism, the same source, that's really helpful for making it feel consistent and structured. So now mixing metaphors, color spectrum, and your kitchen ingredients, figure out again, what are your categories? What fits in what part of the spectrum? So these are spices, these are proteins, these are grains. Lay them all out, and then start to look at which ones are essential. What do I actually need? So if I'm plating this dish in I need, I think I've talked about this before on World Anvil, but like if I have an area that needs to feel like the hometown, like this is home, is where people feel safe and comfortable. And maybe there's like one home away from home, but if there's like 5 places that are home away from home, maybe I don't need all of them, right?
Yeah.
Maybe we have like one home, we have one tavern that's like their home away from home, and then we cut the rest because we don't need to be able to hit that. We have 2 examples of that color already. We don't need so many examples of that color. So cutting things that are redundant, I think, is a helpful thing to do if you've done kitchen sink. And then again, going through and like looking at what is actually connected to something else, which things can be paired with other things, and doing an inventory of connections. And like it is worth going through each of those items and just like jotting down what other articles on World Anvil of this setting would I link to. Can I link it to at least 3 other things in a meaningful way? And if I can, then like either it's structurally important, or it's connective, or it's just not doing any harm, even if it's a background element. It doesn't necessarily need to be like a pivotal location, but it feels like it should be part of the world because it really is integrated already. And doing an inventory, mapping those connections, making sure that you have, again, an interconnected lore, interconnected setting, I think is a really important like pass for deciding what you're going to do with your edit. And then the last step is basically looking at like what is going to serve your story, because you can have stuff that like might only show up in the background, but you don't necessarily need to cut it from your documentation. That can be there because maybe it'll be in book 2, maybe like just the drop of it in book 1 is great for setting up book 2. Like there's different levels at which these things are going to like be features or highlights in however you're presenting your world. And I think that like knowing, okay, these are the main features, these are the ones I need to focus on, these ones aren't doing any harm, they're there as like set dressing, or they're there to start to weave in so they pay off later, is a good thing to be able to do. How, do you sort of edit back your worlds later? Have you ever found that you've like exploded out of the box a bit too much and you've had to like trim back?
So yes and no. When I worked on the Dark Crystal RPG, I was faced a little bit with this problem. There was so much world building I had to read in order to be able to write the RPG, in order to be able to understand the space. So I read all of this world. And because, as we were saying before, it's a world that's actually been built by a lot of different people. There's lots of different kinds of elements in it. So the first thing I did was I retroacted a meta. From everything I had read, I went, okay, what is important here? What are the recurring themes? What are things that come back again and again? What is our genre? What would violate that genre? What are these sort of particularly thematic touchstones? There were 2 that I came across that I was like, these 2 are really strong. I've seen them everywhere. This should be the tenets of the kinds of stories we're trying to tell. This is the kind of fun we're trying to tell. This is the philosophy of the world. And then there were a bunch of really amazing touchstones that I could use in order for me to understand how everything tied together. Because basically, the Dark Crystal is just a lot of puppet makers being like, what can I make that is beautiful and weird and wonderful? It's got that new weird feeling where it's like everything that they make is supposed to feel like the new weird, but also somehow it has to tie together. And so retroacting a meta for that was so helpful for me. And I handed it on to River Horse Games, who were the people that I was hired to write the RPG for. And they used it for a bunch of other stuff as well. It was something that sort of became a very integral document. And that really helped us make choices. You know, that really helped us go, well, does this thing fit or not? No, it doesn't match the meta. And so not with things that already existed in the world, but with new ideas that were coming in.
Yeah.
I think that really helped me build out in depth because I had to write 100 adventures for this thing, which is like a lot of different ideas. There was a lot of new weird I had to come up with. So being able to like plumb the depths of the meta and flip things around and say, okay, well, we haven't done it like this. Let's take this theme and do it like that. That was something that really helped me fix what felt, to start with, like a fantasy kitchen sink. Like there's all of these elements that don't necessarily go together and all this history.
Yeah. And I think actually just like a good hint for any kind of freelance writing or contract writing, or you're bringing in someone else's project writing, is like if they don't have a style guide, like asking them for one. Yeah, my dog is letting himself out. he's a velociraptor from Jurassic Park, very much. He's figured out how to open the doors, and now he just kind of lets himself in whenever he feels like it. Yeah, so knowing, establishing a style guide, or like even just like, can we agree that these are like the 5 things that are always true of a piece of writing in this universe or this style? That was a thing that I did with when I was writing for the tabletop RPG Emberwind. I asked, like, can I like, are these 5 things that always should be true about like the copy that we write about what the RPG is. So like when we're talking about the game to people, the writing should always hit these 5 notes. And then for writing that's in the world, how do we know that we're telling an Emberwind story? Like what are the essential feelings or like the essential takeaways? And then I think about that, like just writing your own brief is like, it pre-establishes agreement for like, this is what, that I'm walking in the right direction with what I'm working on here. That we're starting from the same core principles, and we can find out along the way if there's some misalignments. But like it will save you so much time in revisions to get pre-aligned that way, and it makes your job easier because like it takes you from this huge field of like I could do anything to okay, well I can do something that fits in these 5 things. Like where's the overlap between these? And I just think that's such a helpful exercise for like it was a thing that I would constantly do as a freelance writer for like creative stuff and non-creative stuff. Just like how do we know this feels like what we want it to feel like?
Yeah. I think you said something that I wanted to hit on, but you already said it, which is edit or amputate things that people haven't seen. If players haven't seen it, if it's not canon, you can just get rid of that. You could just be like, nope, back to the orphan file or the organs file or whatever. Like you can take that out and then you can reuse it again as an idea if you can connect it to something that makes it meaningful. I would also say if you have robots and vampires and fairies and time travelers, and they've all felt up until this point very superficial, start building those connections, start building diplomacy, start building a shared history and a shared narrative that they have. That's going to unkitchen sink your world very quickly, because actually the problem with the kitchen sink is those isolated elements. That's the problem. Once you, to use your metaphor, build a meal with everything and it all hangs together, well, you're not going to get that feeling anymore. And guys, the story potential is real. There is so much conflict and drama and narrative and the interesting character experiences that you can have from bringing those things together, things that have, been isolated. Well, do you know what? Bring them together and see what comes of it. That's what I would always say. Any elements you've established that have until this point been isolated, start building connections, start the vines tangling between them, because do you know what? There's going to be so much interesting stuff there that you haven't considered. It's going to make the setting so much richer and deeper. It's going to make really interesting stories. You're not going to be able to keep up with the inspiration. That's where the drama comes.
Yeah, and it's the flip side, because there's that thing where like nothing in your world is really real or locked in until someone sees it, right? Like It's the act of publication or players coming in. We're like, now it's canon because someone has seen it. But the flip side of that is that nothing is canonically false that hasn't been looked at yet. So all those areas where like the gaze of your visitant has not yet like said, okay, now what I have seen is real and true. All of those things of like, just because those connections between like the fairies and the werewolves have never been explored means that you can whenever you want. It doesn't mean that they don't exist, just means no one's looked at them yet, and you are always free to fill in the cracks where like no one has looked yet. So that pressure of like it's real once they look at it, the benefit of that is that nothing is not real that has not been looked at yet, and you can always make that real later.
Absolutely, I love that. Now, folks, I will let you know that we have just a few minutes left on that raffle. So !raffle if you are over on Twitch and live right now. And we'll be pulling that in a couple of minutes. Now, what I would say, what we've really been talking about here with fixing a fantasy kitchen sink world is building lore, right? It's interconnecting things with information. And I think this is the perfect point to talk about the Lore Masters deck that you have built, because I am so excited for you. It's already funded. It's right here. You can check it out. And we even have, for those of you listening on podcast, Peter has a screen up right now that is showcasing the cards. Peter, can you describe a little bit how these cards come together, how they work, and how they can help you build these kinds of interconnected, inspiring worlds?
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of capture that balance of the borehole and the kitchen sink. I want people to be able to have their galaxy brain moments where things are expanding out and they're expanding, but I wanted those reminders as check-ins to keep things connected and make sure that they have connective tissue to the rest of the world. So some of you may have seen that during the like getting ready screen, I was doing some random pulls here with the cards and starting to create a setting, some lore. So I started off with this faction here, pulled a card. I chose one of the 4 cues. I chose temple, and then I started drawing some secondary cues to find out about the temple. So one of the cues was that they have an agenda to reclaim or restore a significant or sacred location, and that little icon there is the location icon that reminds me to like pull a location card. I gave them some other details that they're trying to prevent an apocalyptic event, that they keep a certain type of creature as a pet or livestock, and that they have cult vibes. I thought like if they're going to be the heroes of the world trying to stop the apocalypse, it'd be cool if they were like weird and creepy on their own. And then all of those secondary cards, like the creatures livestock, I pulled from the other decks of the Lore Masters deck. So you can create factions, you can create figures, historical figures of your characters, events, locations, objects, materials, and species. Basically, these cards start to fill in each other. And any one of these things you want to know more about, you can untuck it, pull it out, and suddenly the apocalyptic event there stopping the ascension will now have its own series of cues that we draw to like tuck under it and define it. And each of those cues will have connections that connect it to other parts of the world. And a good way to be able to tell, like, are you exploding outwards and you're only creating new things, or are you reusing your elements, is we're trying to unlock through stretch goal funding, adding a token set to every box where you can like literally draw the breadcrumbs out in tokens. So here, I have to explain the connection, so give me a sec here. So we created a temple. They're trying to reclaim or restore a particular sacred location, which I decided, because their culty is a crypt for the location card. I chose the crypt queue here, a decaying crypt. And that crypt has art or statuary depicting a creature. It was one of the random things I drew. Well, I already had a creature in place with the Hydra. And I thought, like, rather than adding a new random creature and just kitchen sinking this, what if I tie that back? And I do my little trail of breadcrumbs here, so I know that the creature depicted in the statuary is this Hydra. Later on, when I pull this Hydra card out, I can just adjust that path, and I can learn more about the Hydra and how the Hydra connects to another faction. Maybe it's like the enemy faction of these guys. But it basically makes you make your world building, lore building choices one card at a time, so that you have a chance to consider them. But it makes those choices sort of easy and quick, so that you're not getting hung up too much. You have 4 options. All of them are very broad, so you can kind of interpret them any way you want. And there's always a couple options that tie back to either an existing piece of lore in your world or that add a new piece. So it lets you have a very organic experience of exploding outwards, adding new elements, seeing literally how they map into the world. And then also being able to look for opportunities to connect back. Because anytime I need to connect, say, to the fallout of this event was that one person's personal demons come out, I can actually see, oh, is there a character that I can connect that to? It like literally reminds me what these anchor points could be, and do I want a new character or an existing character? I can survey for that icon in my world and connect it back to a character by seeing that icon, or I can go outward. So it's a nice combination, I think, of like kitchen sink and then reusing the elements, replaying the elements in new ways. And I just think that's really fun. And I got to do my first like live demos on launch day. We did a like 5-hour live stream that got very out of hand, where we were just doing fun demos. And getting to see how other people made choices with this, and how when they wanted to keep things contained and when they wanted to explode out and add new stuff was like so much fun. And I think that experience of like having cards that add play to the world building experience, that remind you that like it is meant to be play, that you can change options and try new things and see what happens, is like a lot of fun. I just like I like that there's always an element of play and creativity, and reminding ourselves that like this it is supposed to be fun. You don't necessarily need to be like sweating through your shirt as you're thinking about optimizing your world or getting it ready or whatever. And that's what the Lore Masters deck is all about. Being able to make these lore webs, have a lot of fun with them, being able to like diagram and map them later. And you can use them to map out your existing elements in the world, pulling cards that are approximate to the things you already have, and then mapping and seeing those connections in a way that you can see what's connected to what. So yeah, fun little diagnostic tool.
I love that, Peter. I'm so excited about this. I'm so excited for it to come out. It's no secret, I've already backed it. I backed it the first day it came out. I backed it before it was funded. It is now funded, so if you do go and back it, it is a certainty. I can say Peter is not inexperienced at this. He has already created 2 absolutely stunning decks. The story engine deck that is behind me, that helps you create sort of plots and map out stories, and the deck of worlds, which is literally a world building tool. It's designed, it's like this, but it's more sort of big pieces and, you know, spaces and that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. I say Deck of Worlds is about mapping relationships in space, like what is next to what, and in time, in terms of like the deck helps you sketch out like the past, current status quo, and then like, you know, gestures towards what changes might happen in the future. This deck is very much about mapping relationships, like explicitly mapping what is connected to what and how, and trying to make sure that those relationships are not always just like they're enemies and they're friends. Like those relationships can become more complex.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ooh, we have a winner. We have a winner.
We do have a winner. Speaking of the Deck of Worlds, I've just drawn the raffle, and Slig60, please say something, anything in the chat to claim your prize. You must say something in order to claim your prize, or I will be redrawing again in just a moment. Yes, there we go. Slig60, please email me at hello@worldanvil.com, and I'll make sure you get your prize. That's hello@worldanvil.com. Remind me who you are and what you won. That would be super helpful. Thank you so much. If I just have random emails in my inbox, I don't know what they mean. Well, folks, we do have, Peter, if you don't mind, 1 or 2 very good questions from our audience. With the Wing says, are there different kinds of kitchen sink world building? What do you think?
I would say so because, like, I think like Monster of the Week is an example where Monster of the Week is kind of both a structure and it can be a meta, especially if it's like X-Files has a meta where like we are trying to look at these like weird fringes of what could be just beyond the world that we see. So there's kind of a meta or a theme that holds that together, and so they can kitchen sink. They can like have monsters that do not follow the same rules at all. You can have like paranormal ghosty things, and you can have alieny things, and you can just have like weird body horror things, and they can all be true. So yeah, I'd say that like kitchen sink can be. I think there are degrees of like how much the things that you're kitchen sinking are related to each other. To I love remixing metaphors. It's like a hobby of mine. Um, uh, the kitchen sink is at least part of the kitchen, and if everything you have is part of the kitchen, there's some continuity there. If you're throwing a bathroom sink into what has otherwise been and felt like a kitchen, that's noticeable. So like definitely, I think that paying attention to what is going to be true, or what are the consistent elements of your world, even when you're adding random elements, will help you understand like what kind of kitchen sink you might be doing. And then again, I think really paying attention to if the themes of your world or the meta of your world supports randomness in some way or makes use of randomness in some way is really important for deciding if it's going to be a problem or not. And I would say like that would help you define what is like maybe effective kitchen sink world building versus like truly random, where you really don't know what kind of experience the reader's going to have because you don't really know what your world's going to turn out to be. And maybe you get lucky and that works out great, and maybe it's like a confusing experience for all involved. You'll find out when you run it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as you say, if you're relying on the setting to be a consistent part, one of the consistent things in your stories, because one week it's a whodunit, and the next week it's a romance, and the week after that, well, you're planning a heist. Then, which is very Dungeons and Dragons, by the way. Then having a more consistent setting is actually very helpful. But if you are looking at the setting as one of the varied elements, like really bringing in different things, that new weird, that Gulliver's Travels, where it's all about the new weird, then I would say that's a different kind of kitchen sink because you're trying to achieve something else, right? Like Monster of the Week, the story is the same, so the world can be flexible. If the world is flexible and the story is flexible, who are we? Where are we? Like that gets you into that amazing meme that's like, I do not know who I am. I do not know where I am. I only know I must kill. Which is what a lot of video games could evolve into as well. If people aren't paying attention to the world elements and the story elements, well, it just becomes a shoot 'em up, doesn't it? And that's very hard to stay with the long term, and that's very hard to invest your feelings in, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's why, like in tabletop RPGs, like players who do game masters who make room for what the characters that are being created want, and making sure that those things that they want are represented in the world, and also players who pay attention to what is in the world and make sure that their characters' wants and background are tied to those things, like that two-way street of making room for connections as a creator and players doing the work of figuring out how they connect, make for the best RPG campaigns. There's nothing worse than that, like so many RPG characters are orphans who have no ties to the world. They come from nowhere, and they're just wanderers with no roots, and like that becomes really easy for telling a story where characters can go anywhere, but it makes it hard to like threaten something that the character holds dear to raise the stakes, because they hold nothing dear, because nothing matters, because they just wander to a new place every time.
Yeah, absolutely. The cartographer Elysium says, we have something like a kitchen sink world, or maybe a too many cooks world. It's an inherited setting from a family who started playing in the early 80s, and it's been added to for the last 40 years. I will finish this off here, and it will copy over. How would you recommend making it all cohesive without losing something established for decades?
I think doing an inventory would be good, and I think doing an inventory with a number of people, because if only one of you is doing it, you might end up editing unconsciously for like the stuff that you care more about, and you'll miss some of the things that made this big collaboration like fun and interesting, and things that make people feel invested because they had a piece in creating it. So I would do that, and I would say like that may not be a situation where you need to like, maybe that's meant to be a big tangled garden and not like a structured hedge maze. Maybe this is meant to be a weird rambly brambly. We built this together, and it doesn't need to necessarily hold together, and that's okay. If you were going to like make the movie of this like amazing like legacy home setting, then I would say like, okay, maybe pick like one editor who's going to decide like this movie in this setting is about these things, and we're going to use these parts of this setting to support that theme and the meta of the movie. But especially if this is like essentially like it's a group storytelling improv activity that is just so beautiful on its own. And like, by the way, congratulations on that. Like, what an amazing undertaking, an amazing result. Like, that is super duper cool. I don't know that that needs to be fixed. Like, that is kind of it kind of is what it's meant to be. Um, and I would only worry about fixing it, so to speak, if someone who's coming into it is not invested in the premise that you already have going, which is that we're going to add to this and we're going to combine things. But I don't think there's a need for that to be canonical. Writing it all down, capturing it all might be fun just as a way of like remembering what you've built together, because that's super duper cool. But I wouldn't worry about removing stuff from it to make that record, you know, easier for other people to understand, unless you plan to publish it, in which case then yeah, maybe have that conversation about like, whose vision of this are we going to present and how are we going to edit it. And that doesn't have to represent the whole world, it just represents this story that you're telling in it.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like your world has a lot of stuff in it, and the thing is, all of that stuff is probably canon because it's a world that's been used. It's not a world that's sat on the shelf and so it's not a Tolkien world where he's just been playing by himself for a really long time and then finally he publishes some stuff, but really he's world building for his own damn self. No, this is a world that's used. This is a world that's been explored and people have run around it, and I think that's amazing. So what I would say is, based on what we've been discussing today, all of that stuff is canon, which is great. That's happened. That is real. So unless there are like outright conflicts between the lore, I wouldn't worry about fixing it that way. I wouldn't worry about necessarily removing things, in my opinion. I build together. So I'd say, well, this thing that they did a session on is kind of close to this thing that we did a session on. So what if we like bring those together? What if we say, the ancient vampire that they defeated over there, actually he had something to do with this thing that is over here, and we bring those stories together, because I think that's where a lot of the inspiration for new stuff can come from, is when you take this element over here and that element over here and go make a kiss, and then they make creative babies in your brain. Speaking of weird metaphors, apparently, and that's a way to turn a lot of ideas into something very positive, and to bring back a lot of elements that maybe this is something we did in the 80s, that was a session we did in the 80s, and now we can reuse this. We can make it new and meaningful again by combining it with something that's more recent.
Yeah, and there's a term I learned recently for a thing that we all know what it is, but not everyone always knows the term. And the term is desire line path, and it's a word for in urban planning where like you've had this field and you put like you paved a path here, but everyone crosses it this way, and you can see the desire line where people naturally go and want to go. The beautiful thing about the world that you've made is that it is a used world, so you know where all the desire line paths are. You're not like an architect trying to figure out like, well, this will be interesting, probably people will walk this way, so I'm going to put the path here. You know where the paths are because you walked them, you found them naturally, like you organically discovered all the things that are cool about your world. Those are your paths that are going to be your lore connections, right? Like the path that your characters walked because they organically were interested in, they heard the rumor in the next town over, so they went to investigate. That led them to finding out about the cult that lives, this way, so they went there. Like those are your desire line paths that are the true highway that connects your world, not necessarily the thing that, with a God's eye view, you would have predicted people would have taken, but the actual path of where it's interesting. Like lean into that, because those bits where the characters were really motivated, where they really wanted, are so real, not just canon. They're like real and compelling, and you know that because you've road tested them. So many world builders don't get to have that experience. They're building in isolation, and then they publish, and then we find out how it all holds together. But you have a really beautiful gift there. So I'd say like lean into, like pay attention to those desire line paths, because that's like where the true storytelling is.
I love that. I think that is a wonderful place to stop for today. Peter, thank you for spending a little bit of extra time with us to speak today on this very big topic, stuffed full of ingredients, that is fantasy kitchen sink world building. I always learn something new. I always think about the topic a slightly different way after I've chatted with you, Peter. It is an absolute gift having you here. Thank you for joining us.
It's always a gift to be here. I love it.
Well, folks, speaking of gifts, thank you so much for joining us as well. Your questions have been hilarious. I think the winning comment today was getting real for a minute. You don't want to build a meal from stuff you found in the kitchen sink. And I think that is, yes, just a little warning. Don't do that, folks.
Yeah. Yeah, just a hygienic level.
Right, exactly. Just getting real. And speaking of getting real, we will be getting real and getting live tomorrow with the final summer camp live stream, the prep stream, the last theme. It's being revealed. What will it be? You'll find out tomorrow. We're going live at 6 p.m. UK time, and I believe 1 p.m. Eastern time. So exactly the same time that the stream started. I will be going live with Danny Adventures and Demetrius. Demetrius will be giving out the last of his Dimmy missions. Yes, there are a few left, and the badge is so cool for those guys. You do not want to miss that. So come join us tomorrow, same time that the stream started. And on Sunday, Madeline will be live with bringing creatures to life with stat blocks. So if you've ever wondered about using stat blocks, building creatures, and all that good stuff, you can find all of that out on Sunday. Again, same time that this live stream starts at 6 p.m. UK. That is 1 p.m. Eastern time. Folks, thank you again so much. A big shout out, of course, to Secondhand Samurai, who has been supporting and moderating in the chat. And I do believe we're not going to leave you empty-handed. No, we're going on a raid. Our raid shout is Light Up the Forge. And we are raiding the Lore Hammering crew. Yes, they are Amberlites as well. They are Andy Law, one of the core writers of Fantasy Warhammer. And he's running a game. And it's amazing. So you should go and check it out. Well, folks, you know what to do. Of course you know what to do. It's time to grab your hammer. Go world build. See you soon, guys. Bye.